chains of oil and ashes of love. The wind carried dust through the plains of West Texas, stirring the dry earth and whispering through the brittle stalks of grass that once saw rivers and buffalo. The land had changed. Greed now flowed stronger than any creek, and the oil boom had turned small frontier towns into nests of power and corruption. Among these was the estate of Thomas Kincaid, an oil tycoon whose reach extended across counties and whose cruelty echoed through the whispers of servants and settlers alike. Among those under his thumb was Eleanor Briggs, a widow in her late 20s whose life had unraveled in a single year. She and her husband, Marcus, had ventured from Missouri in search of opportunity. But the frontier had its own plans. Marcus was gunned down by outlaws near Abilene, defending their homestead. Alone and penniless, Eleanor was quickly drawn into the clutches of Kincaid, who offered her shelter and protection, terms that soon revealed themselves to be slavery. Kincaid didn't call it that, of course. He clothed her, fed her, and gave her a place to sleep. But she worked 12 hours a day in his manor, cooking, cleaning, tending to the needs of his guests, and endured far worse in private. Her voice became silence, her eyes lost their shine, and her soul grew dim. She was no longer Eleanor, the settler wife. She was simply girl, or you, depending on Kincaid's mood. But even in silence, resistance sometimes grew in secret. One evening, as the horizon glowed orange with the setting sun, a group of Comanche traders arrived at Kincaid's estate under a white flag. Kincaid, always interested in what he could take or sell, entertained them with false smiles and offers of whiskey. Among the riders was a tall, commanding figure named Tycoon, which meant new moon in his language. Tycoon was not like the others. He wore no feathered headdress, no ornaments to impress, but his eyes were sharp, steady, and quietly appraising. Eleanor served the men their drinks in silence, keeping her eyes down. But Tycoon noticed the bruises on her wrists, the way she flinched at loud voices, the hollow quiet of someone too long oppressed. As the evening progressed, the Comanche men proposed a trade of hides and horses for tools and supplies. Kincaid agreed with the air of a king bestowing favor upon peasants. He offered Eleanor as part of the entertainment for the evening. A subtle gesture, a lewd smile, a hand on her shoulder that made her stomach twist. "I do not trade in people," Tycoon said softly but firmly, staring at Kincaid's hand. The other Comanche fell silent. Kincaid laughed. "She's not a person, she's mine." The words landed like a stone in water. Tycoon's gaze hardened, but he said nothing more that night. Instead, he watched, listened, and later spoke to Eleanor while she swept the porch. His voice was low, respectful. "What did they call you before this place?" he asked. She looked at him, surprised. No one had asked her that in months. "Eleanor. You are not forgotten, Eleanor." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Words won't set me free." "No," he agreed, "but they can begin the fight." The next morning, the Comanche left. But Tycoon returned 2 weeks later, alone, under the guise of delivering additional pelts. Kincaid welcomed him again, still seeing him as a useful barbarian. That was his mistake. Over the next several days, Tycoon observed and waited. He met Eleanor in stolen moments, brief exchanges near the stables, secret conversations in the pantry. She told him of her life, of Marcus, of the farm she once kept. And in her voice, Tycoon heard strength, buried but still alive. On the third night of his stay, Tycoon made his move. He approached Kincaid with an offer, a rare and finely bred Comanche warhorse, a bundle of silver jewelry, and a pouch of gold dust. In exchange, Tycoon said, "I asked for the girl." Kincaid roared with laughter. "She's not for sale." Tycoon remained silent. He placed a pouch of gold on the table. It was more than what many men made in a year. Kincaid hesitated. "She's not worth that much," he said finally, eyeing the pouch. "She's worth more," Tycoon replied, "but this is what I offer." The tycoon looked between the gold and the woman. Eleanor stood nearby, watching without hope. She had learned not to believe in rescue. "Fine," Kincaid said. "Take her. She's probably more trouble than she's worth anyway." Eleanor stood frozen as Tycoon walked over and extended his hand. "You are free," he said. "No," Kincaid smirked. She's yours now. You'll learn soon enough what a burden she is. But Tan didn't look at her like property. He offered her no chains, no commands. Just his hand and a chance. I'm not going back with you, she whispered. Not to another man's house. I don't ask that, he replied. You choose where to go. With trembling hands, she took his. They left that night under the stars. Tan did not lead her to a new prison, but to freedom, to the lands near the Red River, where his people still roamed and lived in peace away from settlers and oilmen. The journey was hard, the land wild, but Eleanor found herself breathing again. For the first time in months, she watched the sunrise without fear. And slowly, something strange and beautiful began to grow. Not romance, not yet, but trust. And trust, like rivers, can carve through even the hardest stone. Fire in her blood, stars in her eyes. The wind over the Red River was different, freer, wild like a stallion untamed. Eleanor stood on a ridge overlooking the Comanche camp, the dawn painting the sky with lavender and orange hues. It had been a month since Tan had taken her from Kincaid's estate. A month since she had tasted what it meant to not be owned. She had thought she would feel out of place among Tan's people. But the opposite happened. The Comanche, cautious at first, opened their arms to her when they saw the way she worked. How she fetched water without being asked, how she mended clothes with skill, and how she cooked not just for herself, but for anyone hungry. More than that, they saw Tan's quiet respect for her. He didn't flaunt her, didn't force her into his tent. He treated her like a person, something she hadn't experienced in so long it almost hurt. But in that space between them, gentle, patient, a bond began to form. One night, under a sky bursting with stars, Tan sat beside her on a fallen log near the fire. The other Comanche were singing and drumming, celebrating a hunt. Eleanor stared into the flames. "Does it still burn in you?" he asked. She looked at him. "What?" "The fire. For life. Or did it die in Kincaid's house?" She was quiet a long moment. "It flickered," she whispered, "but I think it's burning again." He nodded slowly. "Then there is still hope." She turned to face him. "Why did you really buy me?" He didn't smile. "Because no one else was going to save you. And you deserved to be free. You could have left me. I couldn't." And in those words, something unspoken settled between them. Not obligation, not debt, but something older than both, fate. Weeks passed, and Eleanor grew stronger. She rode horses again, bareback across the plains, wind tearing at her hair. She laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Her hands were calloused again from useful work, not forced labor. But the shadows of the past still lingered, and one morning a shadow came knocking. A rider came hard and fast into the camp. He wore settler's clothes, and the moment Eleanor saw the broken sheriff's badge pinned to his belt, her stomach dropped. "They're coming," the man gasped. "Kincaid's men. 10 of them, with rifles. Said he wants his property back." Tan's jaw tightened. "I'm not property." Eleanor hissed, her fists clenched. "You never were," Tan said, his voice calm. "And you won't be." The camp buzzed with motion. Elders urged the young ones to prepare to flee. Warriors sharpened weapons and saddled horses. Tan, however, did something unexpected. He rode alone, to the outskirts where the river curved, waiting like a ghost beneath the cottonwood trees. Eleanor found him there, just before dusk. "You'll fight them alone?" she asked. "If I must." "I won't let you." He looked at her with surprise. She wore no war paint, no weapon, but her eyes were alive with fire. "I don't need saving anymore," she said, "but I'll stand beside the man who once saved me." He said nothing, but his gaze softened like morning mist. As the sun fell, Kincaid's riders appeared on the ridge. 10 men with rifles, leather vests, and hard eyes. Kincaid himself sat astride a black stallion, smug as ever. "You really think you can hide her from me, Redskin?" he called out. "She's not yours," Tan replied. Kincaid smirked. "She was bought and paid for. That's all a woman is out here." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice ringing like steel. "I belong to no one. Not you. Not anyone. You think your money makes you God? It makes you a coward." Kincaid's face twisted. "You ungrateful." Before he could finish, Tan raised his hand, and a volley of arrows whistled through the air from the trees. The Comanche warriors had circled around, hidden in silence. Two of Kincaid's men fell from their horses before they knew they were under attack. Gunfire erupted. Chaos swallowed the plains. Eleanor dove behind a rock, grabbing the old rifle Tayan had given her days ago, just in case. She aimed and fired, missing her first shot, but steadying herself for the second. A man fell. Her heart pounded, not in fear, but in power. She was no longer a victim. Tayan fought like a storm, bow in hand, moving through the dust like shadow. One by one, the invaders fell. Kincaid tried to flee, but Tayan's horse intercepted, knocking him down. In moments, Kincaid was on the ground, bleeding, weaponless, and afraid. Tayan stood over him. "You don't own her," he said. "You never did. She's nothing without me." Kincaid spat, coughing blood. "She's just a widow. No land. No name." "I have a name," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "And I'm taking it back." Tayan looked at her, then lowered his weapon. "Your justice," he said. She picked up Kincaid's own pistol, aimed it at him, then lowered it. "You're not worth the bullet." Instead, she turned her back on him. Tayan nodded. Let him live. Let him return and tell the story of how a woman and a savage broke his empire. They buried the dead with respect, both Comanche and settler. The wounded were tended to. By dawn, peace had returned to the valley. And with that peace came a choice. Eleanor stood before Tayan, brushing hair from her face. "I thought freedom was the end of my story," she said. "It's just the beginning," Tayan replied. She looked at him long and deep. "I don't want to be owned. Not ever again." He stepped forward, gently cupping her cheek. "Then let's walk side by side. Not as captor and captive. Not as chief and rescued. But as partners." She smiled soft, strong. "Will you marry me, Tayan?" His eyes widened. Then he laughed, a rare, warm sound. "You ask me." "I do." He placed his forehead against hers. "Then I say yes." The ceremony was simple, beneath the sky, with the land and river as witnesses. No white dress, no gold rings. Just vows spoken from the heart, and a fire lit by love and defiance. Eleanor Briggs was no longer a widow, no longer a slave, no longer forgotten. She was the wife of a Comanche chief, and she was free,